Thank you. So in 1892, the Edinburgh-based artist Phoebe Anna Traquair embarked upon an ambitious and intricate project to illustrate Elizabeth Browning's Sonnets from the Portuguese, which she'd eventually complete in January 1897. Her focus on these illustrations is the visionary excess of EBB's sonnet sequence. Throughout her long artistic career, Traquair's main creative purpose was to celebrate the potential of the human mind and spirit. So it's not surprising that one of her main influences is William Blake and his poetry and art. She finds them inspirational, and she uses his illustrations repeatedly as sources for her illuminations and murals. The connections that Traquair's illustrations expose between Blake's works and Elizabeth Browning, I'm going to call her EBB to reflect her own self-designation. So her illustrations expose these connections between Blake's work and the sonnet sequence of EBB are particularly striking because Traquair recognises and elucidates the visionary and groundbreaking poetics of EBB's work at a time when critics generally were assessing sonnets only as EBB's outpouring of love for a poet husband. So I'm going to use the illustrations for Sonnets on the Portuguese as a starting point to look at the ways in which EBB develops and refines Blake's celebration of excess. First, a little bit of background to Traquair for those of you who are not perhaps familiar with her work. She's born Phoebe Anna Moss in Dublin in 1852, and she's inspired by childhood visits to the medieval manuscripts at Trinity College Dublin, particularly the Book of Kells, to pursue a career in art. This leads to her being introduced to her future husband, Dr. Ramsay Heatley Traquair, who's seeking an illustrator for his research papers, and the two eventually married, and in 1874 moved to Edinburgh, and Traquair was illustrator for her husband's papers for the next 30 years. However, Traquair's main artistic inspiration came from literature. She was fascinated by the interaction between the poetic and the visual imagination, and she forges a career herself as an illustrator. Influenced by the early experience of medieval manuscripts that she'd had in Dublin. In 1887, Traquair writes to John Ruskin for advice on medieval illumination, and this sparked several months of correspondence between the two. Ruskin loans her several 13th century manuscripts from his own library for studying. In her long artistic career, Traquair moved to work on large-scale murals, embroidery and enamel jewellery, as well as book illustration. She's a really key figure in the arts and crafts movement in Scotland, and she becomes the first woman elected to the Royal Scottish Academy in 1920. So as I've said, her main purpose in her art is to celebrate the potential of the human mind and spirit. So she uses authors like Dante as well as Blake. Writers and artists whose work she sees as an ideal synesthetic combination of the visual, poetic and the musical. And from the 1890s, she's increasingly influenced by D.G. Rossetti, whose The House of Life was for her a modern counterpart to Dante's La Vita Nuova. Like Rossetti, she valued Blake's poetry and art as inspirational. You remember that D.G. Rossetti famously acquired Blake's notebook in 1847, now called the Rossetti manuscript, often called the Rossetti manuscript. And Blake remains a huge influence on Rossetti. Rossetti goes on to help Alexander Gilchrist to prepare the groundbreaking 1863 biography of Blake. So there's this interesting connection between Blake through Rossetti as well as in its own right. Her interest in Blake is lifelong. He appears in her final mural scheme in 1920 for the Manors Chapel, All Saints Church in Thorney Hill. Blake appears alongside John the Baptist, Tennyson, Lord Lister and Pasteur. Traquair says that in this mural, she wants to consider artists who all sing the Te Deum. That's what she says to her sister Amelia. We all sing the Te Deum, though they don't often know it. And for her, the Te Deum means every beautiful and every fine thing. But for this paper, crucially, I want to think about this image of Blake that Traquair paints standing beside Dante on the north wall of her extraordinary mural cycle for the Song School of St Mary's Episcopalian Cathedral in Edinburgh. Traquair starts work on this mural in the autumn of 1888, taking as her theme the canticle, "O ye works of the Lord, praise the Lord." It's images of celebration. So she starts this in 1888. In spring 1889, Traquair goes to Italy in a party led by the Free Church theologian, Dr. Alexander White, and his wife, Jane. As with many other writers of the period, women writers of the period, the experience of Italy was transformative for Traquair. She sees at first hand for the first time the early Tuscan painters like Fra Angelico and Botticelli, and this is profoundly influential on her work. The song cycle, the song cycle on the song school walls is an extraordinary, energetic, ambitious project in which every single space on the wall is covered with this detail and vibrant colour. She's influenced by Dante's Divine Comedy and the Renaissance art she's seen in Florence. She takes figures from contemporary art and literature. There's Tennyson, Browning, Carlyle, Di Giuseppe there, as well as those long dead like Dante and like Blake, and also portraits of actual churchmen and choristers from the cathedral. That's just a close-up of the image of Dante and Blake. After her 1890 trip, this is one of the first images she does, this image of Dante and Blake side by side. Through her exposure to Blake brings her more interest in Dante. The illustrations that Blake does of Dante's Divine Comedy, commissioned in 1824, left unfinished, are extremely influential and can be seen. The influence can be seen in this mural. In 1891, Traquair starts work on the west wall of the Song School. And this image, Blake's image, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy from the book of Job, is extremely influential. The image I've got here, I'm sorry, it's not a better image. The person taking the photograph was more interested in Henry Willis's Olga in the middle. But if you can see in the background there, the four red-winged seraphs, which are obviously reflecting the four angels here in Blake's image. So this is in 1891. She's linking Blake with her mural here in 1891, and she starts illustrating EBB sonnets in 1892. And her illustrations here expose striking connections between Blake's work and EBB's sonnet sequence. Traquair recognises and elucidates the visionary and groundbreaking poetics of EBB's work at a time when critics generally assess sonnets only as an outpouring of love for her poet husband, ignoring the years of evidence of years of research that EBB actually did into the sonnet sequence, which actually predates her first meeting with Robert Browning. So we know that in 1840, in the Berg notebooks, now in New York Public Library, she's translating and playing with Petrarch's sonnets and the work of a minor Italian love sonneteer, Felice Zappi. In 1842, she writes to Mary Russell Mitford talking about how she's playing with the sonnet sequence and what she can do. So this predates her meeting with Robert Browning. But after her death in 1861, critics generally just think about the ways in which sonnets from the Portuguese, an account of her love with Robert Browning. So a few examples. In 1888, Hall Caine calls the sonnet sequence essentially women's love poetry, essentially feminine in their hyper refinement. That's how he describes the sonnets. Hugh Walker calls them the genuine utterance of a woman's heart. And some reviewers didn't even let EBB have this much credit. So John Cunliffe states in 1908 that Browning's influence upon his wife is written large on the surface of all her later work. The best thing she ever did, the sonnets from the Portuguese, being directly due to his inspiration. So she's not even given the credit for them from that particular critic. One critic who was extremely complimentary and admiring of sonnets in Portuguese was actually Oscar Wilde, who writes in 1888 that EBB is the greatest of English poetesses, that she has a creative energy that is born of a spirit, a winged rapture that is born of the soul, a force and fervour of mere utterance that is all the wonder of the prophet. And it's these aspects of EBB's work that Wilde sees, that Traquair is clearly also seeing when she illuminates the ways in which EBB develops and refines Blake's celebration of excess. There's many obvious connections between EBB and Blake. They're both influenced by similar dissenting contexts, not least the ways in which EBB draws on Blake's social critique in works like The Cry of the Children. EBB quotes from Blake widely in her correspondence and records occasions when she's discussed Blake's work and philosophy with visitors. Both writers are skillful and politically driven medievalists. Like Blake's illustrations of Chaucer and Dante, EDBB's adaptations of medieval text and form offer rich social commentary and glimpses of her own original artistic vision. So we have Blake's Canterbury Pilgrims, an illustration to the prologue to Chaucer's poem, which was the centrepiece of the exhibition that Blake organised in 1809, and was actually one of the first paintings of a Chaucerian subject by a British artist. And in this, we see Blake admiring Chaucer for the energy and penetration of his characterisation, his originality, and his generous humanity. And to quote Claire Pace, for Blake, the rendering of universal truths about mankind was a visionary experience. To Blake, all the pilgrims, however disparate in feature, in behaviour and social rank, are bound together by their common humanity and ennobled by it. And these are the kind of qualities in Chaucer that EBB also shows when she adapts Chaucer, making two contributions to Richard Hengist-Horn's The Poetry of Geoffrey Chaucer Modernised in 1841. EBB demonstrates a knowledge of Blake's work in her correspondence, quoting from Jerusalem and the Four Zoas. She writes in her letters of discussing Blake with Charles Augustus Tulk, who lent Browning copies of Blake's poetry and also shared the works of Emanuel Swedenborg with the Brownings, and they were influential to both EBB and to Blake. Writing to Mary Russell Mitford of her readings of Songs of Innocence, which EBB transcribes in 1842, which would shape the way she presents the child's vision in The Cry of the Children, EBB notes the attraction of Blake's work. Blake. Mr. Canyon had just lent me those curious songs of innocence, etc., with their wild glances of the poetical faculty through the chasms of the singer's shattered intellects, and also his Life by Cunningham. So while apparently also sharing the contemporary belief in Blake's shattered intellect, EBB sees beyond that to the creativity which cannot be repressed. However, the artistic excess and exuberance of Blake's work was always balanced. To quote Lucy Kellett, the ethos of Blake's work, then, is that meticulous technical control through concentration on minutely organised particulars marks a sharp mind inspired by definition and determinate vision. Like Blake's work, EBB's work combines both precision and visual excess. So the sonnets from the Portuguese in 1850 were the product of years of meticulous experimenting with and nuancing of the Petrarchan sonnet form, as we've seen. In the 44 energetic, innovative sonnets that create the sequence, EBB revitalises the sonnet form, reflecting the ways in which, as a female active speaker addressing a male and actively equal beloved, she's transforming the erotic love sonnet sequence. In EBB's Petrarchan sonnets, the octave and the sestet are frequently disturbed, often achieving complex effects by abbreviating and expanding these units, making innovative use of slant rhymes, off rhymes, and near rhymes. And EBB demonstrates that she's fully cognizant of her subversion of this largely male tradition. So an example of this is Traquair's illustration for Sonnet 10, in which the speaker focuses on her right and demands the right to self-expression, and is transfigured by the power of direct speech. She consciously plays at being both subject and object herself in this sonnet, or, as Natasha Distiller suggests, EBB offers a poetic subject who only comes into being because her beloved is also a subject. Here we've got this in the middle of this sonnet. You can see here on the illustration in red, "I love thee, Mark, I love thee," is an image of transfiguration, and in the original, that's italicized in the original for emphasis. And we have this vision of transfiguration here, "I love thee, Mark, I love thee," leaving her conscious of the new rays proceeding from her to the beloved. It's a very visual piece of poetry. And we have an outpouring here. The octave exceeds into the sestet. It's not the traditional Petrarchan form at all. We've got clear evidence here of EBB's revisionism. These rays reflect the rays, that's Stella's rays, which strike reason in Sidney's Astrophil and Stella, also the 10th sonnet of Astrophil and Stella. So we've got this spectacle of transfiguration. And actually, Traquair's illustration is very understated. Traquair's clearly conscious of her role of illustrator here. as you'll see when we see some of the other images, which are much more Blakean in their excess, we have this image, this sort of central image here, like a candle on a sconce, illuminating, looking up to this "I love thee" mark, "I love thee." As an illustrator here, Traquair is allowing the visionary poetics of EBB's sonnet to speak for themselves. She's underplaying her illustration. An illustrator's duty to the text is something which Traquair is extremely conscious of. In an interview with Margaret Armour for The Studio, Traquair explains the differences she sees in decorative and fine art. All decorative art, of which illumination is but a department, being in its very nature an accompaniment, is as an instrument is to the voice, and in this absolutely different from a picture, which stands alone on its own merits, the desired end being a whole in which the sympathy between parts is perfect. If I meet with a book which stirs me, I am seized with the desire to help out the emotion in gold, blue, and crimson. And her projects in book illustrations show her choosing to work with writers who give to this space, to this excess that she can play with, writers like Dante, Blake, Rossetti, D.G. Rossetti, and EBB. So here in Sonnet 6, when the octave bursts its boundaries and seeps into the sestet, emulating the image's merits, the desire that lovers all-encompassing focus on the beloved. What I do and what I dream include thee, as the wine must taste of its own grapes. So that we have a sort of blurring here of the octave and the sestet in the illustration, which exposes the excess of EBB's poetics. If you see the image sort of towards the bottom on the right, you've got the lover enfolding the beloved within a crimson flame against a purple and blue background, alongside this expansive octave that won't stay in its own boundaries. EBB's lines literally seep and flow around the images, freed from an obvious sonnet, the obvious structures of the typical Petrarchan sonnet. And there's fluidity in the figures. And an androgyny almost in the figures that we see throughout this sonnet sequence. We'll see in some of the other examples as well, which is Traquair reflecting the fact that EBB's taken the traditional active male lowly lover and iconicized female passive beloved of the traditional courtly love sonnet sequences. I won't get into the actualities of actual courtly love or not here, but the fact that the tradition of courtly love where you have this active male lover, passive female beloved, and EBB is overturning that. And the androgyny in Traquair's illustrations seems to play on that as well. Just to go back to the interview for The Studio for a moment, Traquair further notes that purple and gold are delightful things to play with. Add to this a love of books and a great desire to project feelings or emotions, and a consciousness that direct transcript from nature did not relieve me of the burden of feeling, which for the moment was master. And we see this purple and gold with which Traquair says she yearns to experiment, used imaginatively in the sonnets as poetic symbols of excess. Many of these purple and gold sonnets have these framed pictures, framed illuminated letters, reflective of the medieval manuscripts that you saw in like the Book of Kells in Dublin, as if the artist is trying to capture and contain these ideas of excess. So this is an example. This is Sonnet 38, where the speaker perceives the lover's first kiss on her hand. She says more clearly than a purple amethyst ring. But his third kiss upon her lips was folded down in perfect purple state, as what we have exemplified here. This image is dominated by this central letter F, which the horizontal arms are joined to create this frame around the lovers who are embracing before this inky blue sea, watched by a rainbow of heavenly observers, which are reminiscent of the frontispiece of Blake's Visions of the Daughters of Albion. We've got heavenly observers there in both of them. In the 12th sonnet, EBB most obviously subverts the usual Petrarchan roles of iconicized female beloved and active male lover. The speaker is a female lover who can boast of her love, but this love is reciprocated and interdependent with the beloved, who is equally active, taking the lover's soul and placing it on a golden throne. In her illustration for this sonnet, Traquair focuses on the emotional excess and the speaker's demand to express her love. And we have here the lover in a ring of fire, which leaps up this right hand of the illustration, out of which spark musicians. There's a sort of creative energy in this love. And again, we have this quite androgynous central figure, highlighting the interdependence of the lover and the beloved. This is perhaps the most strikingly Blakean image of the sonnet illustrations. We've got here in Sonnet 14, the speaker demanding that love be its own creator and cause, that she should be loved and love for love's sake only. Shaka Akajanian has explained this definition of human love as self-generated and self-sustained is the fundamental assumption of a new metaphysics of love expressed in the Portuguese sequence and has no counterpart in past or contemporary theories of love. So we've got a very innovative idea here from EBB, and Traquair is elucidating this with a visionary Blakean dream illustration, the speaker arising from and surrounded by these elemental flames of love, standing with arms upright, arms outstretched, with this image of the lovers erupting from the top of her head is the image of power, energy, and excess. Drawing from many of Blake's numerous fire images, most obviously perhaps Albion Rose. However, instead of the clear full frontal masculinity of Blake's figure, in Traquair's illustration, just go back there for a minute, we've got this almost androgynous giant. The face in some ways and the hair reflects slightly EBB's own portraits, but actually the body is androgynous. So the androgynous giant born of earth, fire and sea, creating this new image of love and these haloed lovers emerging from the mind and imagination of the haloed creator. It is a new, original, consciously excessive, consciously exploding accepted norms of the expression of erotic love, and quite clearly based on a Blakean original. Of course, the most obvious sonnet of excess in the sequence is the now probably quite hackneyed Sonnet 43, the penultimate sonnet, How Do I Love Thee, Let Me Count the Ways. It's a long-time favourite of a particular kind of Valentine card. YouTube shows you a deluge of versions of this book in very different voices. There's one very entertaining one involving Lucy and Snoopy from the Peanuts cartoon. But this now over-familiar sonnet is actually revolutionary, explosive and excessive. The female speaker is demanding a right to love and express that love, and it's impossible to quantify or to contain. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach when feeling out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. It's an emotion that will exceed life itself and increase after death. And as we've seen in the sixth sonnet here, we've got quite a revolutionary idea here. And Traquair's illustration is actually quite quietly intense. In the main image, we have the lovers framed in purple, which is a sort of romantic, sublime landscape in the back, realised in the purple and gold that Traquair is so fond of. But as you can see in the more traditional limited letter H that opens the sonnet, we have a more traditional vision of the lowly beloved, the lowly lover, and the iconicized beloved. So we've got here Traquair obviously showing visually the ways in which EBB subverts those traditional sonnet sequence roles. To conclude then, the idea that EBB's poetics are excessive and innovative has been the focus of recovery work on her and other 19th century women poets since the 1980s. But what's remarkable about Traquair's illustrations is the stage at which she's illuminating this excess in EBB's work. By the 1890s, what Marjorie Stone has called the appendage approach to criticism of EBB was at its height. So over 30 years after EBB's death, she's celebrated only as Mrs. Browning, a muse to a great husband, far more so than her own right. But that a woman illustrator working at exactly this time could not only see this potent excess, but link it with the visionary romantic excess of Blake, most obviously expressed in his exaltation of active over passive and excessive restraint in the Proverbs of Hell, is well worth further critical interest and investigation. And just there on the bottom, on the final slide, I've put, if you're interested in looking more at these illustrations, there's a wonderful digitised version of the manuscript on the National Library of Scotland website. Thank you very much indeed.